Hey, Cross Cultured, it's Tuesday Truth again. We're going to be diving into Titus, the next few verses after verse 4. And in this passage, Paul gets right into talking about why he is sending Titus to Crete. And you see that right at the top. He says, "This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, and his children are believers and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination, for an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also to rebuke those who contradict it." So you see there right at the top, why is he sending Titus to Crete? Well, there's a bunch of Christians that need to be put into order. They need to be organized into churches, and elders need to be appointed in every town. Now, remember last time we were talking about Crete? This was a place that was very pagan. It was a little bit like the Las Vegas of the ancient world. And so these Christians who had come to faith really needed to develop communities of godliness in order to thrive. And so really one of the first places that Paul points them is to the appointing of elders. So the rest of this verse, of these verses, really shows Paul what kind of person should he be looking for in identifying elders. And here's what he says. He says, if anyone is above reproach. And then you see that again later down. It says, for an overseer, another word for an elder, as God's steward must be above reproach. So these elders, overseers, these are the pastors of the church. And that term above reproach is Paul's kind of summary term for talking about someone who would be qualified to be a pastor. And then the rest of these things that he's bringing out are just different ways he's fleshing out what it looks like to be above reproach. So first in verse 6, you see that he needs to be a godly man who is committed to cultivating godliness in his home. You see, he's the husband of one wife. So he's sexually pure. He's maritally faithful. And his children are believers and not open to any charge of debauchery or insubordination. So one of the key things to look at in somebody who's aspiring to ministry is, what does their home look like? Is their godliness personally being translated to godliness in their wife and in their children? And that's not to say that elders can't be single people, but on average, most of them in this context would have been married. And then later he says, he must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. And so you see there, he first starts by talking about 5 things that he must not be. He must not be arrogant. That's one thing. Or quick-tempered. He must not be a drunkard or violent. That's another thing. Or greedy. Or greedy for gain. And then in verse 8, he contrasts that with this connecting word but to show the things that he must do. First, be hospitable, to open up his home and be generous and support others. A lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. And so these are kind of painting a portrait for us of what someone should look like who would be the kind of person that we would put as an elder in a church. And then finally, Paul emphasizes one last thing that's perhaps the most important one in this context. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also to rebuke those who contradict it. Remember that in this context, you had people who were used to being lied to, people who probably were lying without even realizing it. If you have struggled with lying in your own life, you know the more you lie, the easier it gets to lie. And so this type of person who we're going to put in leadership of the churches, we organize the churches, needs to be someone who's trustworthy, who's committed to the word, who's committed to the truth, and somebody who understands the truth so that he can instruct the church to also stand for the truth. And then finally, he said he needs to be able to rebuke those who contradict the truth. And in our culture, sometimes we kind of go back and forth between either saying, everything's fine, you do you, bro, you're fine, to you're the worst, you're dead to me, cancel them. Paul's not advocating either of those. He's saying that we need to gently, lovingly, but firmly rebuke and contradict those who are compromising the truth of the Bible, especially in contexts like this, where it would have been very confusing and filled with lies. Now, as we consider this, like how can we apply this passage that is primarily talking about how we identify elders for churches? Well, one, there may be some of you who are watching this, you young men, who have had that question in your mind, like maybe I'm called to be a pastor. Well, this is a great moment for you to look at those character qualities. The sexual purity that Paul says must be present in someone. Think about that. Think about your own battle with pornography, what you may be looking at in secret, your own battle with sexual temptation. Are you living an above reproach life? If everybody knew your search history, would they say, yeah, that guy should be a pastor? I don't say that to crush you. I say that because who you are now is who you should expect to be when you're leading. We don't want to wait until a future season to get serious about our fight with sin. We got to do that right here and right now. And I will say from my own experience that as you do battle with sin, it does become easier and you do get more victory as you do so. But we need to take a look at our character. Think about your hospitality. Are you somebody who welcomes the outsiders, people that are not as cool? Think about being somebody that isn't a drunkard, somebody that's not addicted to things, somebody that's not doing illicit drugs. Think of somebody who's not violent or greedy for gain, just out to get their own glory in every event that they're in. So it applies to us, to young men who are aspiring for ministry, for sure. And it's good for us to think and say, Lord, please help me to grow in these particular areas that maybe are coming out. It also applies, though, to young ladies. This is the kind of guy you should be looking for. Not the guy who's impressive, the guy who's swole, although I guess that helps, but the guy who really is trustworthy, guy who's committed to loving others and self-controlled. Not a guy just who makes you feel a certain type of way, but a guy that you could really trust and you can really point to and say, yeah, their character is above reproach. And really we know that these character qualities are not just true for future leaders. Actually, in the next chapter over, we're going to start seeing those same qualities applied to older men and older women and to young men and young women. So these are character qualities that we're all called to. But ultimately, we shouldn't be condemned by looking at the different types of things that Titus was supposed to be looking at and then looking in the mirror and seeing how we don't measure up. Because if we look at what Christ did when he lived and had completely pure motives, was completely hospitable, was completely faithful to those he loved, we can see that he actually accomplished a life that perfectly fit these descriptions. And he gives that to us when we trust in him for salvation. So even as we apply it and we think, how can I grow? We should do that with a freedom and with an eagerness and with a joy, knowing that we have no condemnation as we trust in Christ. All right, we'll see you next time on Tuesday Truth.